Thank you for joining us. This is a conversation in an education on failure by academia. As you can see, the title is quite carefully crafted. I'm Chintan. I will be your moderator. I was a speaker last year. You know what that means. My friends would know what that means. And but let me start by saying that I had a hard time thinking about this panel because I felt that there was something unfair about it, and then there was something fair about it. Let me say what the unfair part is. I think it was unfair in the sense, the unfair part of it is that academia comes so early in one's life and influences so much in one's life that we don't know where its role ends. And therefore, what is it that you won't attribute to academia is a question I was struggling to answer. If you think about your own personal failures, and you force yourself to think about what is it that could have been done differently when you were taught, you would come up with something. As a teacher, I often, when my students go out, and of course all of us fail, so they fail in various ways, and then they come back and tell me about it, I do find myself introspecting. Is it something that I could have done differently? So in that sense, it's sort of a question of, failure of parenting type of a question, right? And it influences so much. So anyway, that's the unfair part. I think the fair part of this panel is that the four eminent speakers you're going to hear from do have an opportunity to fix the failures they're going to talk about. So that is the fair part of it. Now, so hold them accountable for that. Here's the sequence we're going to follow. We're sitting in that sequence. We'll start with Geetha, go to Manu, then Sanjay, then to Ambuj. The reason for this sequence is that we were sort of like design thinking, like we're going to open up with framing, then go narrow with examples, then open back up with some more framing, and go back to personal examples. And so that's the format we're going to follow. Here's what my request to you all is, as the audience, as I get that laptop with Slido. While each speaker speaks, if you feel that, no, this is all this is gyan, this is a cop-out, then and put those feelings in the form of questions on Slido, and I will see if I can make room for those tomatoes and eggs to be landing somewhere. Deal? Is that good? Okay. All right. Good. So we're in this together. We'll get going with Geetha and then go forward.
How many of you in this room are from academia? Can you put your hands? As I suspected, right? It's largely people in civil society, in NGOs, in organizations working very hard to make change in the most hard-held areas of the world. Well, I'm a teacher, and I've been a teacher for over 51 years, and I'm 75 today. Not today, but now. Sorry, that was wrong. I'm framing failure differently. What I heard this morning, and I wasn't here yesterday, is failing was personal when it's missed opportunities or when you didn't meet a target and so on. But what I have found, and I've been writing papers on crafting change forever, is that there is an evolutionary phenomena that we can call failure. And I just want to expand that little now, and I'll end with it again. A phenomena is something that's observable. It's something that you see, but it's a pattern that evolves over time. It's not a one-off, right? So then, when it's evolutionary, it's supposed to adapt, modify, and become different. But when failure is something that adapts and modifies and remains a failure, that's what I'm going to talk about. So I'm not going to talk about like that. So it's a personal history, perhaps, but it's not. To me, it's a reality of 51 years of trying to fight for change in the Indian educational milieu and perhaps somewhat outside this country as well. So now let me see if I can make this work. Okay, so I went to Genesis AI yesterday, right? I said I had to do that. I had to find out what the intelligence organization of Google was going to say, and it said it's complex. It's multifaceted, we know that. It depends on context. And it's really, in its simplest terms, it is a non-attainment of a goal or an outcome. But in truth, I know, and the last sentence is mine, that you cannot have such basic definitions of failure. You cannot just say, well, I didn't meet a target. I did not meet 2% or 10% or 25% or whatever it is you were talking about, right? It's got a far more boundary reach, and that reach is over time. It just compounds itself. There's a compound exponential thing to failure. Can it be neutral? You know? There's this objective view of failure. We think it's okay. It's neither positive nor negative. It's just about setting a matrix. It's just about a benchmark. It's just about a scale against which we measure ourselves. In truth, we know it's not. It is, and it is not. It is not because it's also subjective. You can talk all about the refrigerators and solar and electricity and hopes and, energy and policy change, but in the end, it affects the individual. In the end, it is set by societal norms. Nobody knows that better than a woman, right? And it affects personal values. So one can't sit, as we're all sitting here today, and say, let's talk about personal failure. I don't think you can do that, because it's compounding itself as we speak. It is both objective because we set those benchmarks and targets and attainments for ourselves, and yet it is also subjective because we have no safety nets to measure it by. So then, is it an opportunity? As we are trying to tell ourselves today, and I sometimes fool students, and I apologize to students, I failed to say, in a design school, fail fast. Try again, you'll get it. The next time, learn from failure. Is it such an opportunity? Can you tell that to the poorest of the poor? Can you tell that to somebody who's never had water? Or is it an opportunity is it an obstacle to growth or an opportunity? I'm not so sure, but I can't valorize it here today. I can't sit there and tell you that it's okay to fail because it's only going to compound itself. It's not going to go away. In thinking of framing it academically and also trying to put it in a non-subjective perspective, I looked at Tagore's creative unity. And for those who don't know Tagore, all of you must have heard of him, but in his book, in his essay really on creative unity, he was the one who founded the Vishwa University, Shantiniketan, the World University in Bengal, just after independence. And this is what he wrote. He wrote some very powerful things in that essay, but he said that a university should be an open community of scholars, of teachers and students working and learning together. I've been in education for 51 years. I've been part of university institutes here in the United Kingdom where I taught and studied, and in the USA where I taught. That it should not be a mechanistic institution for collecting and distributing knowledge, and that instead it should be a living space where minds are created, talents nurtured, and where the pursuit of truth is paramount. In this age where we stand on the precipice of human consciousness being challenged in so many ways. Perhaps Tagore's words resonated so much more with mine, because I know that over the last 51 years, I have not seen this happen. I have seen universities being framed in many different ways, very often copying and mimicking those in the West. And Tagore wrote in his essay in the late 40s, he said, our universities, and he's talking at that time of the colonial universities that were set up during the colonial rule, are all white. I don't think in 51 years we have changed that premise. We have not looked to a university that will serve us. We have set those objective standards, those benchmarks, against parameters which I question now. So where are we today? Objectively, today, in this country, the universities of higher education or institutions are fixed by the University Grants Commission and are framed by targets set by the NAC, National Accreditation and Assessment Council, the NRIF, and other forms of global ranking. So these matrices, which are objective, give you the success or failure of an academic institution of higher education. It's not about what happens in learning. It's not what happens in development. It's not what happens in change. Your measure and your money comes from that ranking. Over time, what has this resulted in? It's resulted in India for a paralysis of growth and a development of, we do not have an evolutionary mindset when it comes to higher education. The university is a closed system of inputs, processes, and outputs. It has a bias for certainty and for data. It's also on predictability based on the Newtonian model, which makes the system inert and managing change a complex task. It's about what can we do today? That is the failure, right? It's a monumental institutional national failure. And the only thing that can move from being, there we are, to become, is to recognize that we are in this point of disruption, this huge civilization moment that we live in, which we can take hold of. Evolutionary biologists like Steven Pinker and Richard Hawkins and others have called it the punctuated equilibrium, when the status is so disrupted that change is possible. And we can move to something networked, holistic, and open. And we can recognize our breakdown conditions, and we can build leaders who can manage this turbulence and think holistically. I haven't got stories to tell. I've got failure on my face. I've lasted 51 years. I've written, my PhD was on managing change and inertia in Indian education. That was in 1996. If nothing much has happened, what story can I tell you? What little glimpses can I give you? I give you Tagore's parrot story for those who haven't heard it. There was a Maharaja who was going through the forest, and he heard the sound of a beautiful singing bird. And he told his ministers, find that bird and bring it to me, because I would like it to sing songs to me every day, and you are going to teach it the songs to sing. They built that bird a huge gilded and golden cage. They put the bird into it. They fed it pieces of paper with various songs and made it sing till it lost its voice. And one day there was a dead parrot inside the cage, the big golden gilded cage, lots of dried pieces of paper, and no bird. Is that what we have done to Indian education at the highest level today? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And yeah, we are between you and lunch. But Geetha left us a very powerful image, and perhaps carry on from there a bit, I think. So my story really, my stories, I suppose, of failure start really with, and you're probably wondering why we have a tiger on the screen, right? It starts with when I joined a graduate program in wildlife science 27 years ago. And very quickly, I kind of realized that the tigers were very happy themselves. It was us who was the problem, right? And the place I did this study, where I kind of did my master's program, we had a wonderful 6-month thesis component. And part of that thesis component, I lived and worked in a tiger reserve for 6 months. And in those 6 months, I saw 3 tigers. And that too because the tigers were collared, right? Which means the tigers, they were very, very rare. And instead of tigers, what I saw a lot of was cattle. And I also saw a few people in the tiger reserve, right? So there are many very funny stories I can narrate about, finding people and their excrement, etc., in the forest, where plots were created for animal counts and so forth, right? But the point being that why was this the case? The biomass in the tiger reserve was the source of sustenance. Was actually where people got their sustenance, got their wealth from, and it was a largely pastoral community that lived around. Also, a point I forgot to mention was that there was a National Mineral Development Corporation diamond mine within the park. Well, the boundaries of the park were drawn creatively, so it was technically outside the park, but essentially it was inside the park, right? But these are the kinds of activities that we rely on for income, for livelihoods, for aspirations, for wealth, for growth, for all of these kinds of things, right? And I guess the intuition that kind of was born at that time through that experience was simply that, without engaging that side of the equation, the needs, the livelihoods, what Gandhi would have called need and greed, there was really no hope for the tiger, right? And so I kind of ended this 2-year, fantastic 2 years, by the way. We got to travel widely in beautiful parts of the country, live in tiger reserves, so on and so forth. So fantastic experience, but it left me kind of disillusioned. And so the end of it, I had a master's degree, but I was like, okay, what do I do with this now? I spent 2 years, and I was very confused and quite disillusioned. So I kind of wrote this down on the last page of my dissertation, a sort of, I don't know what it was kind of me trying to explain what my own disillusion to myself, probably a note of protest. Either way, I basically was trying to say that unless we engage development, there's no point talking about conservation without talking about development, right? And so the whole point about counting tigers, managing them, managing their habitats, so on and so forth, was kind of redundant as far as I could tell, right? And so that instinct has stayed with me, and I think gone on to hold on to it, and over the next decades, I think it's moved from an intuition to a conviction now. And this, I think, is one of my first issues, is that we've tended to emphasize managing our problems, right? We've tended, especially in the context of development, we're trying to solve for these problems and managing them. And higher education has focused really largely on managing problems, training us to count, all these excellent techniques of counting animals, extremely complex statistical methods of trying to identify populations of tigers, so on and so forth. There's no end to all of these things that we know to do. But the problem is that if you look at any metric, this is the direction of travel. I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with this. This has been coming out for a number of years, planetary boundaries. The direction of travel is going exactly in the opposite direction. So management is not working. Research or training from the point of view of managing these problems is not really adding up, right? We might find individual success stories here and there. There's some great story, tiger population revives somewhere, etc., etc. All of that happens, but by and large, we're traveling in the wrong direction. So if it's not managing the problem, what is the problem, right? I think the need, so if it's not managing, we need to move from essentially asking about the technical details and to talk about values. I think the conversation has to move from needs and greed and really thinking of ways in which we can actually distinguish between need and greed, right? And so a few years later, after I had my my first give up or my first quitting moment with the masters, I went into masters in public policy. And in those years, I learned an interesting idea. I mean, this was talking about development as freedom. And for me, this was a big aha moment in my life. It said, okay, this is not growth, this is not efficiency, this is not technology innovation, this is not any of the usual things we associate with development, but it's about freedom, right? And all of these other things, whether it's innovation or efficiency or productivity and so on and so forth, all of them matter only so far as they enhance the freedoms that people have to value, right? And now how do we do this? And I think the question, this challenged me a lot. I mean, I didn't know how do you go from thinking about values to actually understanding and debating questions about values, right? And so it stayed with me, and when I started teaching about this, the big challenge I had was, where do you go to talk about values in society? There are no places we know to talk about values. And I think this goes to the social soil point that was spoken about earlier today. We analyze, we discuss, we debate in the classroom, and I used to teach a course on urban mobility. At the end of the course, I would tell people, there is nothing more, and this is in the context of Bangalore, there's nothing more about Bangalore that we can analyze the traffic situation, right? You have to engage the city's politics. And when it came to engaging the city's politics, there was no way in which it was beyond my skill set. I hadn't invested in a certain skill set to talk about the city's politics. I think earlier on today we heard the word awareness and social relationships. How do you do these things? This is not stuff that I've learned in a university, and it's not stuff that I know how to teach about. But the puzzle, as far as I can tell, is not managing the problems. Puzzle is, how do we learn to live well together? And each of those words matter. How do we live well together on a shared and finite planet? And doing this, one immediate kind of space that came to mind was, this is a picture of a ward committee in Bangalore, right? Wards are the smallest administrative unit in the city. They've been largely dysfunctional. We've always wanted to make them work, but they don't. They don't. Why? That's really the precise failure, right? I, as an academic, have no way in which I can explain this, or I don't even have the skill sets to engage in this space, right? But my understanding is that these are the places that need to work to build the social soil that was referred to earlier today, right? And maybe we get to that, and maybe we don't. But unless we kind of try to navigate those spaces, we are not going to be able to discuss development, think of the ends of development. We're going to be fixated on means. And without talking about the ends of development, we often forget the fact that development is built on an extremely high level of violence. This is not, I'm not being kind of dramatic here. This is very hard-nosed number counting, right? People are killed in resource frontiers for the extraction of resources, so on and so forth. You can, any number of instances of violence on which development stands. But without going back to the question of ends and means, and without figuring out how we're going to discuss ends, discuss our values, debate our values, share our values, and then arrive at a consensus, there's no way in which we can actually move forward, right? And those are skill sets that I, as an academic, don't really have. I haven't quite invested in them, but as a true academic, again, let me leave you with a question and transfer the problem onto you, right? So I think, how do we reimagine, and I think this is the puzzle, how do we reimagine curricula so that the modern mind is moved to triangulate through politics towards the idea of justice? Because fundamentally, at the core of what we call normal today is a deep level of injustice. Climate change, for example, wouldn't exist if we couldn't freely displace people, take their resources, burn the resources, pollute their environments. If people had the ability to resist that, for example, if I was driving a car on the street and the people on the street, the pedestrians walking on the street were able to resist me because I was polluting their air, I wouldn't be able to drive. So at the core of what we call normal is the deep level of injustice. And I think to think about climate change as one topic or inequality as another topic is probably a false dichotomy. It's really a question of justice that we're after. And how do we arrive at a just outcome through politics? I don't think we're going to manage it. We've tried it and we haven't arrived there. I don't think we're going to manage our way to the solution here. Thank you.
Thank you, Manu. So there are some jibes at us here. Pretty fair. Actually, if you're a young person, you would have these things in mind. Let me first relay them to you. If there are any thoughts, then we'll take them right now, and then we'll go forward. Somebody saying that, this is the least accountable sector of all. Okay? Somebody is asking, why do you have to give a PhD to somebody to teach? There's that. Somebody is saying, you're barely teaching, you're barely promoting research, nor are you accountable. Where is the question of success? Any thoughts on these?
All right. Right? I think that this is what I meant by the objective things of set by the standards of the UGC that requires everybody to have a PhD to teach. In the field that I've been working in, which is arts and culture and design and technology, practice and the practitioner is somebody who's highly regarded, and that's what our learners want. In our own culture, the musical traditions, the gharanas, the dance traditions, and other traditions, the literary traditions, are also always with gurus and with people who are experts, in their performance capabilities. But we create the matrix, right? And then that's the bar, and that becomes the jail, and that keeps people in a place. And yes, there's no accountability for the university, because the accountability for the university is to the matrix and not to the learner. So you're right, there is no accountability. But do we ask for it? The demand in in higher education is so high. And do you know the rejection at an IIM? Do you know how many people in the subjective realm of failure commit suicides, get bankrupt, and do all these things because they don't get into higher education, which is seen as their vehicle for development and for the quality of a better life? We fail, and we fail big time. We cannot stand here and be proud of it. I'm not proud of it. You're right. But who's going to bell that cat? Another thing, the gilded cage. The UGC requires at least between 25 to 30 acres of land in a city like Bangalore to start a university or a college. How much is that going to cost? Where is that money going to be transferred to the students? Please remember, I did not talk about it without knowing the matrices. It's a monumental failure of the Indian mind and the people who will not fight to make this system more open, more flexible, more pro the learner, and that to tell me that there are no teachers and that they have to get PhDs. How many billion people do we have? Don't we have teachers? Yes, we do. But we have to certify them with a PhD, and that's wrong.
Otherwise, it will become an argument between us. Okay, well, there was a reason I asked you to put your questions on Slido as we talk about things. Because this is not a question about those who work in academia. This is a question for all of us as to how are we going to shape our education system so all of our children can do what they ought to do. Manu, you want to say something? Yes. Quickly, and then we'll move on to...
And I think, so I think maybe a part of the problem here is we've kind of think of university education really as training. It's technical training, really. It's not an education. Unfortunately, right? And that's all that's being asked for. So I'm not transferring the blame back on the thing, but I think there is a imagination problem here. But what does it mean when you say going for a university education? Might as well go to a trade school.
So I want to say that, so there is a question lurking here in the background, which is that do you imagine a university as a factory or a garden or a part factory and part garden? What is it? That you imagine. So we will come back to that when we come to Q&A. So Sanjay, please.
So how many of you have taken on a job in the development sector right out of college? 30% maybe, yeah, 30% or so. I did not. I entered the corporate life, spent some time helping corporates recover from some of these questions that we're talking about. But eventually in 2016, I moved out of my corporate career to say, oh, I think I'm not making a good use of my life and I need to do something else, and enter the development sector with all these great ideas in my mind, saying, oh, I know how to build plans and how to do things and how to organize and stuff like that. And then one day, I just want to kind of put up a picture. I walked into a school, and behind the chair of the school principal was this poster which said, do one thing every day that scares you. I said, oh, education never taught me that. They only taught me to do stuff that is within my comfort zone. And here is a teacher. So I asked him, why? Why do you have this behind your chair? And he said, I have this behind my chair because if I did what the system wants me to do, if I did what the policy asks me to do, if I do what I have been trained to do, if I do what all the other different civil society organizations are advising me to do, my children have no future. I have to do what is right for them. They are first generation learners, their parents are disorganized, I don't have teachers. I'm living in a migrant community ecosystem, and I have to still figure out how to give good education to these children. And none of that is in any of these things. And I said, wow, that's interesting. I have completely failed in understanding even what is it that I could do. And that was a big learning, big moment for me, because I had to literally throw away all that I had done all those years and start again. And saying, no, I don't think I understand what it takes to drive a transformation. Over many years, I started to explore this question, saying self-organizing agency of micro-communities can scale to awe-inspiring movements. And what does that mean? What does that mean when you talk to a farmer? What does that mean when you talk to a healthcare professional in the foothills of Himalayas? What does that mean when you talk to a social worker in extremely violent areas? How do you even understand? How do you leverage the agency? And today morning, Otto gave a view into how to get to that. But the question was, how do you do that? And so I said, okay, I think I'm onto something and I'm learning something. And then 2019, I saw this chart. Time published this, which is a very interesting chart. It talks about global population, gross domestic product, fossil fuel emission, and atmospheric CO2. But those were not the factors. The factors was how it looked. I said, wow. I think we have lost our relationship with time. And I said, oh, I'm so screwed up because I have no understanding, because I am living at this moment, I'm thinking about this moment, and maybe a few years plus minus. But if you zoomed out and looked at what's going on, you're completely missing the picture of what's going on. This chart is available publicly to anyone, but the question that had scared the wits out of me, I said, how are we going to deal with this? Because this is a force, a pattern, which is not going to be as straightforward. And so all my designs and all my great ideas and all my processes and metrics and systems and all are essentially useless in the face of such a phenomenon. Because such a phenomenon has a velocity that is unprecedented and ununderstood. And I love this interesting quote. Because I started studying, and Albert Bartlett said this, the greatest shortcoming of the human race is our inability to understand the exponential function. I said, interesting, when I was in school and college, and yeah, I did some exponential equations, etc., but I actually had no clue what I was looking at. I had no understanding of what it means in real life, what it means in society, and how things compound, and how things get, one thing leads to the other, it just multiplies, and I'm again entering this space with zero understanding of how things compound and multiply, especially when 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 20, 30, 40 patterns multiply, right? And I don't think I have any idea what to do with this. And so that led me down to again the question of saying, okay, we need to update the model of thinking, because something is not right, because my brain is incapable of resolving this kind of a question. And I said, okay, let's start with the simple statement that if the challenges are exponential, then our response also has to be exponential. Let's park it there and try to understand what do we mean by an exponential response. Because most of the responses I was encountering were all linear. Let's do this, let's test it, let's do some RCT, let's get a project piloted, and let's go. Let's go and Godspeed and let's multiply. But nobody is looking at, is the multiplication linear or is the multiplication exponential, and how does it change? And does it change the entire fabric of the society and the underlying ecosystems? And so many questions, and it was just failing it all the time. And so I said, okay, let's start to see if we can model some of these lessons. And I took the fearsome task of trying to write a model, because amazing minds had written the design thinking model, amazing minds had written the systems thinking model. I said, okay, let me see what else can we add. So I took the task of saying, let's write the societal thinking model. How do you think about designing for the society at large? It's not human-centered design. It is not system-centered design. It is a design for a thriving society. Brought in the questions around agency, the role of abundance, the role of diversity, networks, interactions between humans. How do people come together to solve problems for people and the planet? And so all those kind of questions started to package. Having done that for a few years, I said it's time to go and share this and become the quote-unquote academia and see if I can teach this. And then it's when it all started to fall apart. Communities of practices failed. Embedded modules in different courses that different institutions were running failed. I ran a program with Ashoka called Aspire. Vijay is here, she was running the program. Oh man, that was hard. Failed. Online courses, Udemy, failed. Thought about setting up Societal Academy. Varsha is here. She was the one who was trying to set up the Societal Academy. Failed. Ran workshops after workshops after workshops. Failed. Even wrote 3 books, still struggling to get them around. Saying, I just can't get these ideas across. And so, because these are the ideas that we need to understand how to use them, having to deal with the real university. When I was at Infosys and we were setting up the Leadership Institute, we had a very interesting saying that the company is the campus, business is the curriculum, and leaders shall teach, right? And so I said, okay, society is the campus, right? Encountering such complex exponential behaviors is the curriculum, and the leaders of the sector have to teach. But, oh no, it doesn't work. Failure after failure after failure. But in this process, I learned 5 things. A, the mental model was, bring them where we are. Oh, we have this knowledge, we have this center, we have this place. Come, learn. I learned that that's a stupid idea. We have to meet them where they are. So to go and meet the change leaders in their situation. And they may not be some accomplished NGO. That could be a Gram Panchayat, local village leader. And that's the system that they need to really think about and see what to bring change. To go and meet the people where they are. I also learned, tell them what has been done. This is how you do it. This are the examples. These are the case studies. These are the successes. See what has happened here and see what has happened there. But I've learned none of that works. What works is build on what they have done. And what does it take to go from there? Rather than saying, oh, this is all possible. You can do it. No, at least I failed in doing that. I failed in teaching them how to change. Here are the models, here are the processes, here are the practices, design principles, what have you. Go ahead, you can apply it. Stupid idea, fails. You have to go travel on their journey. You have to actually live the life with them. And so journeying, co-traveling became a part of the mental model that I'm trying to pursue now. Looking at the next aspect of evaluate their impact, right? Is it really happening? And I now have that could be another conversation for a conference as to why the way we measure impact and the way we think about measurement of impact and learning, etc., needs a substantial rethinking of what are the failures in that. Failures in measurement, impact, and evaluation could be a full 5-day conference. But coming to saying we have to accelerate their progress because they are moving in a certain direction. And the question is, how do you accelerate the progress of people and invest our energy there rather than asking them to defend their position? So that's where I again failed. And lastly, let's pivot the seasoned leaders. These are great accomplished people. Let us work with them. Let us see if they can really make a change. And what you realize, that is so hard. I have failed miserably again and again on that, saying, let's learn with the next gen leaders. They have fresher minds. They have more, but actually they have much more progressive minds. They have clearer minds, not clouded by expertise. And you know, Shunryu Suzuki, who's one of the Zen masters, had once said that in the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. In the beginner's mind, there are lots of them, right? So look for the beginner's minds, right? Because experts have very few possibilities that they can anchor around. Beginner's mind have infinite possibilities. So lastly, here we are. If it takes a village to raise a child, I believe it takes a network to enable a leader. And that's the journey that has now begun. And failures are happening. Even some have happened yesterday. They happen every day. And the question always is, it takes a lot of us to come together and educate and learn and build this ecosystem with the next young generation leaders to say, how do we go around dealing some of these challenges which are not linear, which are not simple, But we have no option. We are the ones. There's nobody else to actually deal with them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjay. On Slido, people are imagining education as a paradigm in various ways. We will go into some of that right after Ambuj and I have our banter. Because I think those are questions about development sector and education, so that'd be very relevant to go into. But there are three questions that Ambuj, I know when in our conversations they've come up, and you may choose to say something about it as we go on. One is, have you had students who have inspired you? One question. Yes, I know. So that's one question. Second, what is this whole thing about public and private institutions and all that? What does that have to do with what we want to do through education? Or are we doing the right thing there? So can we unpack, if you have any views on it? I do know you have views on it. The third and final, somewhat of a dark question is how can we have a system where people try, get depressed, and even kill themselves?
Okay, I've already answered your first question. I have students who have inspired me, absolutely. Sorry, your second question was about?
The public and private.
Versus private.
Yeah, but you go on and weave that in.
Yeah, let me get back to these because yes. I do want to follow the instructions from Harish, who said, when I asked him, when I got the request to talk on this, it said the failure by academia. And I said, do you mean academia in general, or do you mean an academic who's me? And he said, the latter. So he was very clear, so I do want to kind of talk a little bit about that. But I think I will use that to get to the questions that you're interested in. I'll do that very quickly because I do want this to be a little bit of back and forth. I want to just give a few examples where, in my own journey, I'm not sure I would call them failures, but I think there are what I would call discontinuities in my journey and what I could call moments of self-reflection. And I think they were very important for me, but they kind of, it was a disruption in my journey, and I think it was an important, important lessons for me there, and I think, but there are also important lessons that I look back now for how we are academics as general. I'll just give, as I said, 2 or 3 little examples. The first example was when I first entered IIT, I'd always done fairly well in school. And my first set of exams was a wake-up call, which is that you might be clever, but there are people much cleverer than you, which is a lesson in humility, which I've never forgotten. And I think it was a very important lesson for me. Then I went on, and I'm going to keep it really brief because I don't want to turn it too much into a monologue. Then I went on, come from an academic family, so it was natural for me to go on to graduate school to do a PhD. I'd done mechanical engineering at IIT Delhi because I loved cars as a young kid. And what's the next step that you want to do if you're really into exciting things? I went to aerospace engineering, right? Because that's even faster machines than cars. A few months into my time there, I was working on this very exciting project, and the project review manager came. It was a project funded by the Air Force, and he said, this is really interesting research. I'm not going to bore you with the technical details, but he said it'll help us make, it's really important because it'll help us make jet engines for our fighters much better. And that was a second moment of self-reflection for me, which was, what am I doing this for? I must confess, I mean, I had gone through my undergrad education like a lot of young kids still do, kind of unthinkingly, putting one step in front of another, and everything, if you're lucky, it plays out. And certainly you have to say, wait a second, what do I want to do? Right? And actually, I think that was my first, I would call my first big failures or moment of self-reflection. And I said, I want to do something different, and I switched actually to, broadly I would say, move towards biomedical engineering, because I thought that is going to be more societally beneficial. And then the reality was, it was quite exciting, but I serendipitously ended up taking a course in public policy and realized, actually, if I'm really about impact, maybe public policy is really where it's at. Which is again a wake-up moment call for me, because effectively I thought I'd done engineering, I'd stayed, to use that term, inside the box, and suddenly it became obvious to me that maybe I needed to do something else. It was a wake-up call. But you know, it's funny, you keep on thinking that you're becoming more emancipated, but you also, you realize that with each of these things that maybe you're not as emancipated as you were, because they were still within the paradigm of publishing papers as the way to make change. And it took me a while to realize that actually that's not what really drives change in the end, right? At least for me, the realization came that change comes from building institutions. Because the people I really admired in my time in the US were people who had all built institutions. And institutions to me are machines, and actually Selco is an institution, which is a machine that keeps on giving forever, right? So I said, okay, I have to take a leap, and then actually think about building institutions, and came back to India to do something, which was basically engage with an institution that's major institution in the Indian context, which is IIT Delhi. And I came back all fired up about institutional change, and moving along, and suddenly, you know, as they say, you find yourself driving in sand. Because I came here and basically went nowhere. And again, to cut a long story short, I remember a very heated argument at IIT Delhi about some issues relating to IIT Delhi and public policy, trying to get something on public policy and getting nowhere. And one of my mentors in India, somebody who's not alive anymore, Dr. M.K. Bhan, who put his arm around me and said, Ambuj, you think you're going to win people over with argument? You know, academic, right? That's what you do. And he said, you never win people over by arguments only. You win people over by affection, which was, again, a learning moment for me, right? I must confess, I've tried to imbibe that, but not really succeeded. I am an argumentative Indian. But the point I'm trying to make is that actually, you have constant moments of self-reflection where you are hopefully using them to grow. But the fact is, it's always a work in progress, and I feel I'm still a work in progress. I want to just maybe make two or three other small points, right? Sorry, I have to put on my glasses. I would say that, you know, in some sense, people would say my success is trying to persuade colleagues at IIT Delhi that we should establish a school of public policy, because to me, that was my theory of change. I have a brother who lives in a village, somebody I admire very much, and who often calls me up. We talk on the phone more often than I see him. He doesn't come to Delhi very often. And multiple times he tells me, he's like, Ambuj, you know, you have no understanding of what real Indian life is. You built your public policy school for what? What change are you making? And it's always a wake-up call. I think it's always important to not get caught up in your own self-importance, which I sometimes do, but to say that it's really about answering the big questions. What does this mean for academia? I want to get to that quickly, right? The lesson for me is the following. I reflect on my own life, and I reflect with all the student conversations I have, and I have conversations with a lot of students. Because I'm an alum of the institute, I think they feel that they can actually chat with me about that. And I find that I think the big place where we are really failing, there are many places we are failing, and I agree with with my colleagues, but I think to me the biggest place we are failing is we are really imparting skills to students and not making them grow. Not helping them think about what they want their life to be. And to me, for me, I wish I had done that thinking in my undergraduate, and actually I should say, many of my students are doing that thinking now at a much earlier stage, and I'm really excited and inspired by them. They're doing it much earlier. But I think as academics, that's the place, one place I think where we really fail. I love quotes. I'm going to come up with a few quotes, right? I use this quote with my students all the time, which is by Kierkegaard. It says, life can only be understood backwards, but must be lived forwards. But then I also say, I have the other quote that says, if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there. So I think it's really important for us to get our students to, or help them to actually think about their future in the ways they would like. And as I say, I think our responsibility is to tell them not what to think, but how to think, and then have the faith that they will go in whatever direction which is meaningful. I'll end with one last quote because it is about failures. As I said, I love quotes. This one says the following: good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And but Ambuj, I'm going to push you on this. See, one of the things that's common across all of you is this idea of self-reflection in some sense. Is self-reflection a luxury of riches? We see so many of our university students who come from such modest backgrounds. Just getting that next damn job itself is a big deal. Where are they going to self-reflect?
So Chintan, I can only talk about the environment in which I live, which is IIT Delhi, it is a privileged environment. But there are a lot of students in our cohort that come from very, very modest backgrounds, right? But I think it's not like they don't want to do exciting things with their lives. We have this example of this ex-student that we both know, Surbi Yadav, who comes from a village. She was the first person from a village to go to college, right? She's done all kinds of things. She went to Berkeley for her master's, and she has come back and set up this non-profit that actually is giving young women skills so that they can get their own livelihoods and are empowered. So my point is, she comes from a very modest background, but she also wants to do something impactful with her life, right? So I think somebody may say, look, for me, getting a secure job is what I want, fine. A lot of my students aspire to IAS, that's fine. I don't agree with it personally, but at this point in time, I'm not sure that's the right thing to do, but it's their choice. But a lot of them do want to do some very different things. In fact, that to me is always exciting. Our students want to be change makers. They understand the world has all these problems, and they want to engage with these problems early and hard. And I think our job is to, first of all, let them think that they can do it, empower them, and then support them in that journey.
Please.
I just wanted to add that what I learned was that if I'm not understanding the self-reflection capabilities of the people, and you specifically refer to elites and the riches, is because I don't have ears. And the day I grew my ears, I understood that there's a lot of self-reflection that happens. I was in Bangladesh with Brack and the team, in Jashore, going through Dhaka, going through projects. Just keeping my mouth shut told me that there is a lot of self-reflection going on amongst the people who are actually working very, very hard lives. The day before yesterday, I was in Kenya and listening to many of the people in the counties of Kenya. There's a lot of self-reflection. In India, any village. And what I have learned is that there is a lot of deep thinking, lot of very, very fundamental, simple, basic questions that people work with. But if we want to understand them, then we just need our ears and nothing else. Because if you open our mouths, that voice gets drowned. And so I would think that it's not the question whether they have the ability to self-reflect. I don't think I have the ability to listen. I think that's the bigger question.
And Chintan, I'm wondering if the question was about self-reflection or the ability to take risk, right? The former, I think,
Sure.
I agree with both of them, right? Self-reflection is
fair
I think it's the ability to take risk that I think, if honestly one has to acknowledge, and certainly in my case, I could spend 2 years, do a master's in wildlife science, and then at the end of it, have the luxury to feel confused about it, and kind of be lost for a bit, and then actually work for a year without pay, because I didn't have to look after my parents. They could look after them. They both had government jobs, and back those days, government jobs were like pretty good, right? So I think honestly we have to acknowledge that fact, right? I think the ability to take risk certainly is a function of privilege. I think though, out of the self-reflection, many more people would love to have the ability to take the risk, right? So I think that is something we should just put on the table.
I put a...
And
yeah.
yet,
And
10
yet.
seconds, and yet, what I showed you, do one thing every day that scares you. That government school teacher in an extremely remote village with hardly any resources is taking risks every day.
And then...
Sorry, and I want one more line, I mean, based on that, which is the line that again a colleague of mine had up on his wall, which says, it's challenged, right? It says, a mind once expanded never regains its original shape. So our job is to do that, and self-reflection to me is part of that.
I asked this as a somewhat of a rhetorical question. We all know, or somebody said famously that, well, I'm more excited about Kabir than Buddha because Buddha had experienced opulence and then gave up. Kabir had never experienced opulence and still was enlightened. Let's move on. There was one question that I want to paraphrase, which several people have asked, and it has been voted high. And this is a development sector question. They're saying that we kind of frame the development sector opportunities very negatively or poorly in academia. We say this is a low-paying, feel-good job. Not a, high impact, some other positive framing of it. And therefore, people end up in such work with that mindset. Should we do something about it? There are some other angles in these questions about it, which are quite generative in the sense that can a sarpanch or a district collector ever become a thesis committee member for a PhD student, for example, and such. So any thoughts on how do we position development sector in academia versus how we ought to position it?
I think that the question is in a different space. Why should we promise anybody, taking on what you've said, if we are expanding their minds and if we are giving them ears to listen, and I mean a voice, and our ears listen. I'm sorry, Sanjay, I got it wrong. If we can actually give them that, they're going to make that choice. What we end up doing is bribing them by telling them that the placement service will place you at a job of X, and therefore they don't even become teachers, forget development in things. So I think it's about changing the reference points, right? If in academia we work at expanding the inner self of people and giving them opportunities and letting them look at everything before they can make a choice, it's hard. But I don't think we can only make a job or a placement something that we start with. What I worry is when a parent comes to sit in front of me at the admission interview for an undergraduate course, they want to know how much their child will be paid for and returned. And that is a current mechanism of how much they have to borrow in order to put their child through the higher education. I'm not talking about government education like an IIT, which is privileged to get in and which has a highly subsidized fee, but I'm talking about in general, most people are going to private higher education institutions for which a parent has to take a loan. So it's not that they're against development thing, it's not against being a teaching or an academic thing. And I think anybody can sit on a thesis committee, it's a decision of the Vice Chancellor.
That sounds like a failure. So, well, we are being called to order. People are hungry. Final question, something along the lines of one of Ambuj's quotes, that if you don't know where you're headed, you won't get there. the question is, where are we headed? What is one of the highest rated questions? Is it before talking about failures in academia? I would like to understand what every speaker here thinks about what is education for? What is the goalpost?
I think I've already said what I think it is. It is actually empowering students to find their own path. It's very important, but I think, so let me say, I think there are two different things here, right? One is, what is our role as teachers? But also, how do we think about academic institutions? Because in the end, I want to come back to the institutions, right? And I think the question of where institutions are going, I think that is less clear, right? In fact, when we were talking about this, right, I think my own view is, one of our failures of institutions, of our academic institutions, not individuals, is that I think we don't know really what success is. We have different people have different ideas of what success is, but somewhere I think we've kind of lost our way there and not have this clarity of purpose as what we are about. So if you ask, I think if you ask actually a lot of directors of major institutions, I don't think you would get a very clear answer. Part of it is, at least again at IIT Delhi and other IIT institutions, we confuse the success of our students with the success of the institution. IIT is great because IIT graduates have done very well. That's honestly a bit of a cop-out. I think we actually have to ask, what has the institution done? And to say that the students' greatness is because of us, I think is a little bit unfair sometimes, because many of our students, I think, would do pretty well, right, even if they had gone to a non-IIT. So I think this question about, as an institution, which a lot of leading institutions across the world ask them, I think that's a really important question. And that actually, Geetha, where I kind of maybe had disagreed with you a little bit on that, I don't think we can all put it all on the UGC and things like that. No, I think that is a major. Yeah, but this is it, but in many ways it is on us. And so my last quote is, we have seen the enemy and it is us.
I think the big question is education the place between demand and supply? Or is it a place from where we emerge? And I think that's the question. Because when I look at the education system, I look for how is the system improving learnability of people and learnability at different levels. Is there enough to prepare me to learn about who I am? Is there enough for me to learn about what I believe in? Is there enough to learn about what can I do in the interest of the questions that we are facing around us? And is there enough to learn how do I go about doing it? Rather than saying, oh, which are the jobs and how do I prepare for that job? So I hope that we can really move towards a world where education is not a matchmaking service between demand and supply, but a mechanism to help us emerge from this place of who we are, what we believe in, how do we want to do things, and how to go about doing it, right? So that is what I believe is the question for the education system.
I think the idea of education is really, in my mind, helping people find their voice. Every individual has a voice, and I think when you put them in, make them face the world, what do they see, what do they have to say? I think that is the beauty, and that I think is really where you really, as a teacher, you really go, wow, when you read stuff people write, and there's unique perspectives, interesting perspective, that really is the most exciting moment as a teacher, right? So I think education ought to bring us there, right? But I think the point about where it's going, I think there's a bit of entropy, I think, going on here, right? We're going from wisdom to specializations. And we kind of, there is an innate wisdom which we fail to inculcate and essentially have over-specialized and hyper-specialized, and the whole incentive structure of universities is really around faculty having to micro-specialize. And I guess I'm largely limiting it to the development environment sector. I'm not talking about neurobiology or anything else, right? But I think in these spaces, I think at a great peril, we've hyper-specialized. And that also leads to kind of an earlier question around courses that are billed as job opportunities, right? ESG, this, that, and the other. These are all degrees now. And you wonder, my God, where is the big picture in any of this? We're training people to see a lot of trees, but no forests, and there aren't any forests left, metaphorically, right? So yeah, I think that's where
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, given that India has such a large number of people seeking a better life. The purpose of education to me has always been in preparing young youth for a better quality of life, wherever they come from, in very simplest terms, a good life. I feel it's very difficult to make that promise today, given the complexity of the institutional problems as well as the personal problems. I would like to say that it's a problem of scale, and I think that unless we bring the scale down and we follow a small and beautiful Schumacher kind of philosophy of being able to say that we can sustain smaller institutions with individual but diverse ideologies about what they think the good life is, that diversity spawning rather than bigger and larger institutions multiplied and cloned across the country, will bring back regionalism, respect local knowledge traditions, bring proximity brings people together more than distance, and I hope that the scale will come down and that we will be able to see smaller, more flexible, more agile institutions catering to communities which are today excluded because they just can't get into that bigger institution.
Great, thank you. Geetha started us with a profoundly large framing and ended us with a profoundly well-structured objective at a very high level. So thank you so much for doing that. I must confess in closing that when I was thinking about how does one moderate such a panel on such a topic, I really struggled, and then I thought, what the hell? At the most, this is a failure conference. I will fail to moderate well. But nevertheless, I then pushed myself to think about what is that one feeling that I want people to have as they go out of the room when we end this panel. That one, and how do I describe it with one word? And that one word in my mind was messy. And I think this is a messy space when you think about it from the failure perspective. I hope you get a little bit of a sense of it. I had a hard time thinking about it. We have to keep thinking about it. One of the things that I must say while I'm here is that we have to collectively think about what happens post a failure conference about these failures. I think between the two conferences, I think that will be something that will be a success.
And just to
Thank you
mention,
very
Chintan, you have failed. They're not leaving messy, they're leaving hungry.
All right, off you go. Thank you very much.